Hi, everyone. My name is Sherston Pugh, and I am one of the Associate Directors of the Negotiation and Conflict Resolution Program at Columbia's School of Professional Studies, as well as I am also a proud alumni of the program. On behalf of NECR, welcome and thank you for joining us today. We began this career deep dive series to provide NECR, SPS, prospective students, and just everyone interested in conflict resolution to give them a glimpse into the careers of conflict resolution practitioners who are making impacts in and helping to define the conflict resolution field. So without further ado, welcome to La-Verna Fountain. Thank you for being here today, and I will turn it over to you.
Thank you for letting me join everyone. And I'm La-Verna Fountain, and I'm a part of the inaugural class in the NECR program. I was very proud of that. I really think the program was created just for me, and I was excited when it happened. I have to tell you, I was working at Columbia at the time, and I was actually looking at another program when this one came about, and I promptly left that behind and decided that this is the one I belonged in. So I'm very excited to join everybody and talk about my pathway. Next slide. So I come from a very small town in Pennsylvania, Mount Union, also known as to some people Captain Jack. And if you look in the upper left-hand side, you'll see where it's really in the valley, it's surrounded by mountains. It's one of the things I still crave often. I love the trees, and people often say, "Are you a mountain person or an ocean person?" And I think that this hit me from the very beginning. I need the trees. I need the greenery. So I like to visit the ocean, but I'm most at peace in the mountains. And on the right-hand side are my mother and my father. And the lower left-hand side, I'm the little child that's yellow, the yellow child with my big sister and my two big brothers. I am one of four children, and I just want to point out that Mount Union, I think at the time when I was born, Mount Union's population was about 4,500 people. And so it's been on a steady decline since then. So, I got there. Mount Union was one of the stops on the Underground Railroad. And that's ultimately how Black people ended up in Mount Union. And there was brickyards and other work that ultimately brought Black people there from down south. That's how Mount Union has its Black population. My family comes from a place called South Boston, Virginia, which is right on the line of Virginia and North Carolina. And ultimately, they migrated to Mount Union, where there was the promise of work. My mother was one of 13 children, and she had to quit school in the ninth grade to go and help take care of her family. So she was never able to get um, her high school diploma or college. My father was a foster child, but as a foster child, he had the opportunity to get his high school diploma. And they're both deceased now. And at my father's funeral, one of the most interesting things happened. They kept talking about my father and saying he was a math whiz, he was a math genius. And I thought, well, I wish he had shown me some of that math genius stuff. I actually do like math, but it never occurred to me that my dad had that particular skill, that he would actually do things in his brain that other people use pen and pencil for, or the beginnings of a calculator, and he would correct people when they would do stuff and let them know it was incorrect. He didn't do that for me. I had one brother, the one brother who's beside me in the picture. He died a long time ago when he was 26. And I think in our family, it was shaped very much by the area where we came from, my parents' journey. My mother, her family was ultra poor, and in fact, they were called the Shantytown Rats. And because they did live in a shantytown, dirt floor, no indoor plumbing. Um, and I think she carried some of those insecurities of what it meant to be a shantytown rat. Although I often would smile about it because you know what? If you see one rat, you see a lot, you know? And in my family, it's like if you messed with one of the rats, they were all going to come running. All the Shantytown rats were going to come and protect whatever one you were messing with. And so that's my spin on what it meant to be the daughter of a Shantytown rat. I'm very proud of the fact that our family truly watched out for everyone, truly took care of everyone. And I would say the other thing that shaped me coming from Mount Union, this very small town, color was kind of like a sidebar. We would have migrant farm workers come through and they were welcome to stay in our home and I was welcome to go stay in theirs. And everyone, you always cooked extra food. If you could make some beans and rice, then you could feed more than yourself. And so something I think that made a huge impression on me always was you always had enough to take care of at least one other person. You always had enough, made enough that you could take care of your family. And that just didn't mean your immediate family, it meant your family. And that family for me was very multiracial race, the human construct race, which I hate because I always say my race is human. And so therefore people with all different colors on their skin were part of my family. When I was a young child playing in the backyard on the swings, uh, there was a snake that came down out of the mountains and curled up underneath me and was swinging back and forth waiting for and I was petrified with fear. So I stopped pumping my swings and it was my next door neighbor who happened to be a white woman who came out and killed the snake. And those are things like that that always was there for me. It didn't matter the color of your skin, you were there for each other. Next slide. So, I'm a proud Army vet. And I say, here's the deal. When you don't know what you want to do with your life, don't worry about it. Uncle Sam will tell you. And that's what happened with me. I graduated from high school without a clue. It never occurred to me to think of college. I had a high school counselor who let me know if I made $10,000 a year, then that would be great. Get a job in a factory. That would be a good thing. I would be success then. So it did not even occur to me to think about college. That was like a foreign thought process. Both of my brothers who had been one brother was in the Air Force, another brother in the Army, and they refused. They told me, don't you dare go into the Air Force, which is what I originally tried to apply for. But I was smart enough to agree with them that I wouldn't go to the Air Force, and I snuck off and did the paperwork for the Army instead. So I didn't lie. I agreed, no problem. And I went to the Army. And it was probably one of the better things I did, very mixed, but one of the better things at that point in my life. I became a military police. And even in that, though, I was a very mixed up individual. Like, what does someone like me have to offer the world? What does it matter? Things were just too jumbled. None of it made sense. While I was in the Army, was when my brother drowned. They were together, and if you've ever watched a movie called Ordinary People, it was a similar situation for them. My older brother jumped in the river, and then my younger brother jumped in after him, and he was the one who drowned. The younger one jumped in. And so that caused a great deal of pain in our family as we tried to navigate what it means to lose someone so young. They had both been Vietnam era vets. My oldest brother became addicted in an attempt to not go to Vietnam. And in fact, the plane he was scheduled that was taking him to Vietnam diverted and wound up dropping him off in Germany instead. And while he was there, to make sure he didn't get sent, he used drugs a great deal. And to this day, he still has flashbacks and challenges from that time in his life. And those things leave scars on a whole family as you try to navigate. Next slide. So while I was in the Army, because I didn't understand anything, mind you, I come from this very small town. I didn't understand anything. So I met too many men. And I was like, okay, I don't even know what you do with men. I don't understand men. So I married the first one who asked me. He asked me to marry him. I married him. I did a pro con list at the bottom of my pro list. Here's the thing. I put down there I could always get a divorce. That was literally in my pro column. So I knew that it wasn't right. But from that wonderful time, I had this child. I became a single parent and I got out the military. And the only thing I knew in looking at this wonderful young boy's face was I didn't want him to be ashamed of me. And I didn't want him to grow up with the stigma of being on welfare. So I went to community college and I knew that I don't know what I'm doing. They, already had it in my mind that I wasn't smart enough to do anything. That was a part of how I thought. So I went to community college, Harrisburg Area Community College, and it was there I had a professor who said to me, "You can do this. You're smart enough. You can do this." And there was a Veterans Affairs office connected with the community college that totally changed the way I looked at things. And in fact, they helped me look back at my time in the military and pointed out to me all of the leadership roles I had been put into when I was in the military. I didn't think of it that way, but I had been while I was in the Army, put in charge of 7 different administrative offices. And it never even dawned to me that that was a leadership role. I became responsible for writing for a newspaper when I was in the military. I wrote the military columns on the police. It just never occurred to me that first of all, people could make a living writing. That to me was bizarre. I didn't realize that. And just that I had a skill set. And it was at the community college that pieces started to come together again. Also at the community college, I had sworn off men after I had put my con columns together. And I said I didn't want nothing ever to do with men again. I had this child I had to raise. But while I was at community college, I think it was like the day after I swore off men, I walked onto the tennis courts where I was taking a tennis class, and there was this tall, handsome, dark man. I was looking riffraff and ticky tack, and there was this guy on the tennis courts. And eventually, he and I married, and we just recently celebrated our 38 years of marriage. He is my boyfriend still to this day. When I graduated from community college, I went to Penn State. I went to Penn State basically because they accepted all the credits I had from community college. And that was the only reason why. When I was in community college, I was able to get an associate's degree in police administration. So I went to Penn State and got a bachelor's in public policy. And that was just because all the credits transferred. It changed the trajectory because of 2 things. I knew how to write and I had this degree. And one day, a backdoor neighbor knocked on my door and said, "I hear you know how to write." And I said, "Yes." And she said, "Well, are you interested in working for Governor Dick Thornburgh?" And I was like, "Well, okay, yeah, of course." A job, yes. And I was able to then get a job in the Republican administration because I knew how to write. I was a military vet. I had a degree, and there I went. Once I was within the state government, I then began working for the Department of Commerce. And then there was a change in administration. And this was my real introduction to politics because I didn't understand politics too well. And it went from a Republican administration to a Democratic administration. And I was petrified because I thought they're going to get rid of me. I had been an active Republican because I wanted to keep my job. And I was loyal to Governor Thornburgh. Governor Casey came in and he said, "If you are willing to not be engaged in politics and work for me, then you have a job." And that was the most amazing blessing for my life. So I was able to then work for Governor Casey. I headed up a travel office in the Department of Economic Development, his advance office. The governor's office saw the work I did with the Economic Development Office and brought me over where I became a deputy communications director for Governor Casey. While I was there, I was approached to see if I would be willing to be the press secretary for the Pennsylvania State Police, because, of course, I had a military background. I had worked for the state police, worked for police, and had a degree in police administration. So I became the first Black and the first woman for the Pennsylvania State Police. That is a huge deal in Pennsylvania. And the reason it's a huge deal is Pennsylvania was under federal order at that time because of the amount of racism within the Pennsylvania State Police. And I guarantee you, it was not the easiest of all assignments to be in that position. While I was with the state police, I got a call one day from U.S. Senator Harris Wofford saying, I've seen the work you do there. Would you be willing to talk with me about becoming the director of my office? And I didn't like Harris Wofford. I didn't like him. I thought people blew a lot of smoke about him because he was highly revered as a white man who had been an advisor to Martin Luther King. And I really resented this white guy getting credit in any way for what he did. So I was going to go and I was going to out Harris Wofford as being a fake. And within a couple months of being the director for Harris Wofford's office, he took me to Atlanta, Georgia, where I met with Coretta Scott King and Dick Gregory, and they greeted him like a long lost brother. They were so happy. And there were these letters that one of my colleagues found with Harris Wofford advising Martin Luther King on when to take a nonviolent action and when it was time for civil disobedience. And I really had to eat all of my words. I had to back myself up and really examine just how much I had prejudged a man who had devoted his life to making the world better for others. That time frame, right through working for Harris Wofford, Governor Casey, was some of the most, I don't know, impactful of my life. And I'll explain that later. But in the end, Harris Wofford wound up losing after he had served as senator. He lost the next election. And I went on then to work for Save the Children, which had me working throughout the United States as a senior advisor. And I worked in Appalachia. I worked on American Indian reservations. I worked in the Mississippi Delta. Um, then 9/11 happened. And while I lived at that point down in Asheville, North Carolina, which is so gorgeous. And of course, it had all my mountains that I needed and I love. But 9/11 happened and my husband got activated and sent overseas. And we had decided then that I couldn't stay alone. I didn't have any family down there. And I had been diagnosed with Lyme disease and was having seizures and that kind of thing. So I wound up needing to leave Save the Children, um, came back to Pennsylvania. And within a year, my mother was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. And then I spent my time with her until she left. And so everything, I think the timing all worked out, things worked as they were supposed to, but I had to rebuild and really try to move forward after going through that. I was able to work for the Department of Education. I worked for the Governor's Office of Citizen Service. And while I was at the Department of Education, I got a call. Now, here's what to me is fascinating about this trajectory, because the person who called me had been my boss when I worked for Governor Casey. He was now the vice president of communications at Columbia, or executive vice president. And he called me and asked me if I would come because Columbia was starting to work on Manhattanville. So I came to Columbia, worked first in the central office on communication. And I was in the position for 2 years, getting us through the ULURP process, going through things, and said it was my face that had been out front. I had been the one meeting in the community. I had been the one talking with the media. I had been talking with elected officials. And I said, my name's the one that made promises to people. My face is the one they saw saying what Columbia would do. And I went and talked to the senior executive vice president, Robert Caston, and said, I got to make sure we do what we said we're going to do. And so they created a position for me in the Department of Facilities at the time, where I retired in 2018 as the Vice President for Strategic Communications and Construction Business Initiatives. And I also had the opportunity to be an instructor in the School of Professional Studies, both in the negotiation program, NECR program, as well as in the construction master's program. Next slide. So that's really a long story about the professional and personal stuff, but I have to tell you, NECR to me was so important, and it really did start with Gandhi and King for me. When I was in Harrisburg working for Governor Casey and Harris Wofford, I was looking at this man, Martin Luther King, and remembered that as a young child, my mother and father had me on a bus ride to Washington, D.C. for a March on Washington. And it was right after Martin Luther King had been assassinated. And his widow, Coretta, was carrying forth his efforts. And so we went to DC. It was such a big deal. I was a young person. It was such a big deal. And there was energy in the air that made me pay attention as a child. And so I really wanted to understand this man, Martin Luther King, and what that did for people, my mother and my father and myself. And in order to do that, I had to understand Mahatma Gandhi. And I had to understand Mahatma Gandhi because he was one of King's teachers. Harris Wofford paid for Martin Luther King and Coretta Scott King to go to India to learn Mahatma Gandhi's nonviolent civil action. So the picture up in the top is really just after I left Columbia, retired from Columbia, came back to Harrisburg. What surprised me most was that the Asian Indian community here remembered the work I had done. And when I hit Harrisburg and they saw I was back, the first thing they did was bring me in to speak this is at a Gandhi birthday celebration. And they brought me in to speak at that. And I didn't realize that the work I had done at the community level, trying to understand Martin Luther King and Mahatma Gandhi, still carried forth. I'm going to explain it next slide a little more. Next slide. But I have to tell you, I graduated in 2010. Don't I look happy there? I lost a little weight since then too. Yes, I have. But I also wanted to show you my husband, James, because while I was at Columbia in 2008, I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. And I was working a job that was highly stressful, which was not exactly the best thing to do with MS. So when I decided to go to school, it was really this dream I had. I had completed all the coursework at Penn State for a master's, but I didn't do the thesis. And then the NECR program was started. And so that was everything to me because it allowed me to bridge work I had done with Gandhi and King, which I'll explain more. And it brought it right to this place called Columbia, which was never in my dreams that I could go to school at Columbia. And now I was able to do that, except physically, I almost wasn't. So my husband walked me to every one of my classes. He carried my books. He made sure I was able to do and meet my dream. And that is why it was a dream fulfilled for me. Next slide. So I talked a little bit about the fact that I was brought in for Manhattanville, and that was my function. I was to help pull together the communications office at Columbia and develop the communications program around Manhattanville. That was my focus. Except this, you cannot really have a communications program without understanding the community. You have to. And so there's lots of different ways of looking at the community, but I knew that the only thing I could do was get into the community and talk with the people. And I did that at lots of different levels. There were the large community-based organizations, but I felt truly it was important that I did individual small meetings, meeting with people where they are at, because then I could hear what their fears were. Then I could understand what the challenges really were. And some of those challenges, if you ever go, people always talk about 1968. Every single public meeting I went to, someone talked about 1968 and what Columbia did to the community in 1968. The reality was we were no longer in 1968. And that's basically how I approached it. I said, I hope no one looks back on my life from 1968 because that'd be kind of embarrassing for me at this point. I was a very different person than I was in 1968. And I had to believe that so was Columbia. But I also believed it was very important that we listen to anyone, particularly in West Harlem, anyone who had fears, thoughts, opinions, not that we would do them, but that they knew they could reach me and they could talk with me. And so I would often walk the streets, walk this whole area just to really hear from people. People did threaten my life. I would be sometimes in the office and people would just show up to let me know they could get to me anytime they wanted. Um, I went to lots of smaller meetings that could have, people thought I was alone. And so I tell my husband, I don't need you to say anything. I just need you to show up. I just need you to show up and sit because people need to see I was not alone. When I walked out and was doing something, that was part of the message I wanted to deliver. But I think having come through the NECR program, I was also communicating with people that number one, I'm not alone, and number two, you're important. And those two things I think carried it through. I had one of the community residents in West Harlem told me, honey, I want you to know I'm going to kick your ass and then we're going to go out for a drink. And she was just letting me know they were going to beat me up publicly. And all I could really say was, that's okay. I'll be back. And I would keep coming back and I would keep coming back and keep coming back. And that was part of what needed to happen while all of the big governmental things were being taken care of. Individual people needed to know that Columbia cared about them. Next slide. So I got tons of awards along the way. I gotta tell you, it's like these are just a few of these things. Like it's like I counted a high privilege that um, on the left hand side, it's Harlem Business Alliance gave me an award for the work that I did with the community. In the middle, I got an award with working with the Latino community. This is in Puerto Rico, where I was able to get an award. And I point out in the photograph there with me is Reverend Jacques de Graff. That was a very strategic move on my part. I started to work with Jacques de Graff, who was the Black man standing up beside me, um, because he could get to people within the church structure in Harlem. And so I would talk with him and he would advise me and he would help me understand what is being said when I'm not in the room. And that was important. And then the woman beside me is Latino. She owns one of the largest construction firms out there. And it was important for me to make sure that I worked with the Latino community because in West Harlem, people think in terms of it being one community. It is not. It is many, many communities. On the other side of Jacques is Michael Miller, who's with the Jewish Community Relations Council, and I was involved with them. They were very helpful. They took me to Israel, which was very nice. Just again, for me, it was understanding how people work together, how we can all work together. I didn't say the woman's name was Elizabeth Velez, and you might see her work sometimes. She's doing some work in Manhattanville. In the middle beside me is Robert Cass, and then cut off is Joe Iannuso. Those two men were very instrumental in the work I did at Columbia. Joe Iannuso is now with New York Presbyterian, and Robert Casson is in Baltimore at Johns Hopkins. And then this is an award I got from some international real estate firm for the work we did in communicating around Manhattanville in the real estate efforts. Next slide. But I have to tell you, and this is the real deal for me, there's the work thing, the thing you get paid to do. And payment is good. And I need security because, I've had been a single parent. And so I really I'm one of those people, I need to know where my check's coming from. I need to know I'm not one of those people who could just start a business and just rely on that. But I also did the things I cared about. So I write, I like to write. I haven't done nearly enough of it. You'll see a book called The Gold Coins under Celia Friend. Celia Friend is my pen name when I write weird stuff. So that's weird stuff. On the other hand side, the Alphabets of Life, when I worked for Save the Children, had Lyme disease. This was way back when 1999 or 98, when people didn't really know what Lyme disease was. And so I felt like, let me write a book, because I thought I was dying, and I thought, okay, let me write a book and leave something for my son. And that's what the Alphabets of Life is. And I have to tell you, I wrote it. I gave it to one of the board members who I cared about and who had taken me all over the country, and he was fabulous. And he read it and he came back and he said, I'm going to publish it for you. Now, that's what he did. He took it over and he did it. And I wasn't involved in the process at all. So, I'm blessed to be able to have that and share it whenever. And then the middle one, though, was the driver. I told you it all started with King and Gandhi. And so I had a bunch of teenagers start meeting in my house. It started with 5 teenagers, and they showed up at my door one day and they said, Miss Fountain, Miss La-Verna, can you please help us? At the time, gangs were in their schools recruiting them. And I thought, you know what? I had no clue how to help. But I said, if you want, we'll figure it out together. And with the young people, we started a program called Discover the Leader Within You. And that was the young people coming to my house every week. It got up to 70 plus young people showing up in my house, and my house was not big, so believe me, it got destroyed. They sat on my floor. It was destroyed. My furniture all got destroyed. But I decided that every one of them were more important than anything I had materially. And with those young people, we studied and we learned all about Mahatma Gandhi and Martin Luther King. We had a couple of Kingian youth conferences. I believe we're the only statewide ones that ever conducted with the King Center. And we received lots of awards from the King Center and others. We created a Gandhi King Peace Coalition, all because of Discover the Leader Within You. No payment at all with that, but it is where I found my purpose. Next slide. And I would say no matter what, that has carried me through. So after George Floyd was killed, I was with women, and we were all like a little too old to get out there and go do much protesting. So I created, and you'll see on my wall, I created the You Matter and the Character Not Skin Color. That's what we decided that we could do, to simply say we believed in creating a world where the individual mattered. You matter. Next slide. And so now, after retiring in 2018, it brings me to today. I do one thing beyond trying to rest and take care of myself. I create a company called Meaningful Communications Matter. And my website, if you look at it, it says this one thing: the answer's in the room. I stand by that we as people, if we will just be willing to hear each other and get past all the noise inside of all of us, we will realize that we have the answers to what we have to do. We don't have all the answers ourselves, but if we'll work with each other and listen to each other and hear each other, then we will realize we actually do have the answers. So the answer's in the room, and the room's in you. That's what I want people to know. It's what I believe in deeply. I do sacred listening sessions to help people and organizations recognize that the answers are there. Next slide. And this is my funny joke for all of you. Yes, when I retired, this is what my former boss, David Stone, had created for me, which I love. That's all I have to say. He made me alma mater. That's it. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, La-Verna, for sharing everything and almost making at least me cry 3 times, but that was beautiful and powerful. Thank you. Um, so I want to remind everyone to please feel free to use the QA box to submit questions for La-Verna. And in the meantime, there are a couple things that I just would love to hear a little bit more about. And you just mentioned your sacred listening sessions. Could you tell us more about what those are and what they look like and how they feel?
Well, actually, as of right now, I'm spending a lot more time doing it with corporations and organizations. However, I have a couple individuals that I just listen to, that I help them just to think, to stop and pause. And I think the pause is the most important thing. there's so much noise that we have to get through inside of our own heads. Um, if people are like me, I'm one of those people. I can get inside of my own head and go spin around, and I really have to go to some quiet spaces to hear what's really going on. So with organizations, there has been after George Floyd, there's been and many others, but George Floyd seems to be the catalyst. um, Many organizations are saying we have to both do something, and we have to um, figure this thing out, this thing called racism or systemic racism. And how do we do that? And people approach me about doing cultural diversity trainings, but I won't do them because I believe deeply that we have to hear each other. I, I tell people you're not ready for cultural diversity training. You've got to learn to hear each other first. Because if you start to see each other as human beings first, then you can move into cultural diversity training. But first, you need to be able to recognize people are human beings, period. I love just the other day, I had to fill out a form, and I took great pleasure in when they asked me what race I was, putting down human. I'm human. Let's start. I'm just human. And then we can go from there. You want to know what color my skin is? Then what are we really asking? What's the question that's really being asked? So when I'm not swamped doing them for organizations, sacred listening sessions really creating open space for people to discuss and talk about whatever is happening in their lives, and allowing for validation, allowing for uh, pain to be present, allowing for um, hope to be present. And I think hope is the big deal for me.
Thank you. And I was just reflecting back a little bit on, you shared so much about your career prior to the NECR program, and so much of that between the communication and facilitating conversations, different perspectives. And so you were already doing that before you came to the NECR program. So I'm wondering, what about the program really spoke to you, or what you were able to get out of the program, even after having all of that other really amazing experience?
So when I first got, I think I was probably one semester in, or like 4 or 5 classes, and I thought, I have to ditch everything I ever knew about conflict resolution. I was completely overwhelmed and felt so inadequate. And I literally said, I first of all, I felt guilty because I thought, oh, I've done all this all wrong. What I had done with the young people, I mean, I was just like, I was, I felt awful. Um, because I felt like I did it. The work I'd done before was really just about caring. Like I just cared about people, but I didn't have any training. I didn't know what I was doing at all. And so I remember after one of Beth's classes, just just coming home and sobbing, like I'm like, I did not know anything, and ditch everything, get rid of it all, start again. And so I was very grateful for every single class. I think the dynamical systems class I wasn't grateful for until it was over. Then because it challenged me every step of the way. But then after the end, after I finished everything and after I got through that thesis, after I got through all of that, I could start to rebuild and bring back in things that I didn't have to throw away. But because I set them over on the other side, I was then able to bring them back in with the knowledge and understanding of what I got through the course. Does that make sense? Yeah, it was an interesting journey.
And what was your capstone topic on? And for those of you who are not as familiar with the NECR program, all students, in order to complete the Master of Science degree, have to complete a massive thesis that we call the capstone. So,
Yeah.
and La-Verna can tell us more.
Yeah. So much like the course, after I finished with the capstone, I felt like, okay, I'm finally ready to start capstone now. But I had to get it all, and now I'm ready to go. I still feel like that. Now I can go back and do a capstone. Mine was on the women of Liberia and the conflict in Liberia. and I didn't know much about it. And it was really looking at how the women came together in Liberia and ended some of the conflict. It was looking at all of the conflicts and what the women did.
Thank you. And this is, it was interesting that you spoke about, and this is sort of much, much earlier in your career, when you were in school and it was other people who sort of helped you reframe the experience and a lot of the skill sets that you already had, but you didn't quite realize or you hadn't thought about it in a certain light. And I think that's, first of all, just so common for most people at also various stages of our lives, not only when you're younger, but sometimes, you know, as you go through life, you forget because it just becomes this inherent knowledge that you have. And so I wonder if you've helped other people sort of think through kind of their own competencies, and or if you have any advice for people who, you know, sometimes it's nice to take a step back and really look at your journey and look at what you have inside of you that you might take for granted.
I would say what comes to mind most for me is just dealing with people who were my employees, so that while I was working at Columbia, which is in my most recent memory, um, recognizing the skill sets that I saw in my employees, and while they may not have seen it, I would see it and say, no, I'm watching you do it. I'm watching you do. I see what you're doing already. So go for that. That's what you want. And I don't have any, I'm not hesitant to have an employee leave me if they're moving on to what they want to do. Like one of my beliefs really is that if you're in a job that you're not happy with, then that means you're taking up space that someone else is supposed to be in. And so I'm going to help you get to where you want to go, because you're needed there, and someone else is needed to do the job that you're in. So kind of move out the way, make some space, and it's all good. Otherwise, you stay somewhere, and I believe you're blocking someone else's blessing. So don't block my blessing. Move out the way, and make it possible for others um, to move forward, to gain the experiences. I would say that's both a plus and a minus for me, though. I have seen things that other people don't see, and or I interpret it wrong. Like I may see your skill, but you genuinely may not really want to draw on that yet. Like you have, and so I could push somebody when they're not ready, and that's not good either. You know, it both. So you have to be careful with it. I think that's where I see you have to be careful. But I basically I tend to think anyone can do anything. Like the question is, do you like doing it or not? If you like it, then you're going to spend more time in it. If you dislike it, then you could harm it.
Actually, that is a great actually transition to my next question because you did talk about, you know, obviously most of us have to work for stability, of course, but also, but then spending and carving out the time to do things that you also love and are really passionate about. And how have you been able to find that balance over time?
Hmm. I
Or
still
when,
struggle with balance. I
I'm sorry,
still
can you say that
struggle.
again?
I still struggle with balance. I do. Um, uh, it, Especially now that I have MS. So there are times when people will talk with me about um, the different abilities that people have, and the a more abled body, or whatever, however you look at it, the proper terminology, and and I don't know, maybe it's a lifelong balancing act that people go through. I'm 63. I own that. I'm grateful to have made it this long, and I still struggle with balancing it. And I realize at this point, part of my struggle is because of the MS. Like if I'm feeling good, I think I can do a lot more. And then I don't realize I'm feeling good because I'm not doing as much. I'm not stressing myself out. And I'm not sure that that is not usual across the board. When I was younger, I could do pull an 18, 20 hour with no problem, like deliver, deliver, deliver. And that way I could get promoted or get my paycheck or whatever. And now it is, what is the quality of life that I want to have? And that is the question I ask myself, and talk with others about it. I do, there's a point where I say I'm glad to be an elder now. I'm really glad to be an elder. I can help some of the young whippersnappers figure it out, right? And part of it is you do want to ask yourself what quality of life you want to have. And I think that that's something that COVID has brought about. Um, COVID has forced people to think about their lives. How do you want to live? What do you want to do? What's important to you to do? What's important in how you look at yourself when you look in the mirror? Do you like what you see? Who are you? And who do you want to be? I think those are critical questions that we have to ask ourselves. And it brings me back, of course, to the answers in the room. So for me, if I ask those questions, it's about what's happening inside of me. What's really happening inside of here? Oh, one thing I do want to tell you, in the program, CMM to me is probably the single best thing that ever happened to me. I love CMM. Like, I love it. Like, that's what I want a degree in now. I want that degree. I really do. Because even when I was still working at Columbia and was dealing with challenges around Manhattanville and the community, I would come back with some of the tools from CMM and use that to work out what's going on. What am I hearing? What's the story that I'm hearing? What's surrounding that story? What are they hearing and what am I hearing? That was an invaluable tool for me.
And for those of you who are not familiar, the CMM
Oh,
stands for
right.
the Coordinated Management of Meaning, and it is a core theory and framework that we use in the program, and there are a lot of models. Anyway, please, I'll put a link to some resources shortly in our chat.
Please do, because that to me is an invaluable tool.
Yeah.
And I was able to use it over and over again in my daily work,
Yeah.
period. I was just able to use it.
Same. It is incredibly practical and it's based in communication. So, and then here's another question. As you just brought up all these important questions, the title of the career, well, the subtitle, I should say, of this career deep dive is thinking about who you are in the conflict. So I was wondering if you could talk to us a little bit more about that and make
Yeah.
that, yeah.
Yeah, so I actually think that at the core of the NECR program, the master's degree is learning about yourself. Um, and when you think about there being conflict, you have to think about yourself. Where's the conflict at in you? So you could be in negotiating something which you do every day. You negotiate every day with someone in some way. Um, and you have to think about, why is there a conflict in here? What's going on? What's the conflict with? Because the person doesn't have to agree with me, but why do I have a conflict? And so that to me is the uh, heart of NECR, first helping you to almost hold the mirror up and look at yourself. And many of the introduction to negotiation, introduction to mediation, introduction to conflict is looking at yourself. Who are you? Who are you bringing to the table? Uh, Before I can look at the other person, I have to look at me. Who am I in this particular conflict, whatever that is? And what conflict do I have inside of me? If you hit my button, why did you hit my button? What is going on inside of me that is responding that way? What 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 just happened? And I believe that, boy, if we can deal with that, we probably deal with 80% of the conflict going on around the world, quite frankly. Like, it's really comes down to what's the conflict inside of you. That's what I think. I don't know.
Thank you. And do you have any strategies for that type of reflection or anything that I know everyone, I'm sure, is a little bit different in their approach, but how do you keep that in mind?
Well, usually I have to get past my emotional response first. Usually I have something that went wrong, like, and I respond, and then I realize I've responded in a way that says there's something else going on. And to do that, then I have to back myself up. I have to be willing to apologize, like, I'm sorry. I may not even understand it, but like the easiest way for me to do it is I say if I snap at my husband, that's my daily, whatever. And he'll look at me funny, like, what did I just do to you? And really he didn't do anything to me, but he said something or physically he moved in a way that reminded me of something that caused me pain before. And it could be that I don't understand it, so I have to go to a quiet space away from any other kind of stimulation and do a check on myself and say what's going on, and I have to get very quiet and listen. So I am not a good meditator. I would love to say I am. I'm not. I try, and then my brain goes in 20 million different directions, so I have to keep coming back. But I do try to meditate and center myself. Once I center myself, once I move to a space of centering, then I can usually hear what's going on. I also have a big German Shepherd who's a big baby. So when I'm really like out of sorts and the German Shepherd comes over, then he kind of brings me back to.
That's great. Thank you. And we have about 8 more minutes for this session. Does anyone, I want to make sure if anyone has any questions, please do share them in the QA. And I have 2 more questions on my own, but I'm hoping that if it,
We had the one about my weird book too. The
oh
one.
yes, that, well, I was going to end with that, but I would because that might be the most important question we have today. So, could you please tell? Just kidding. Could you please tell us more about the coin book that you
Yes.
authored?
So um, five gold. It's called The Gold Coins, and it's a book I wrote actually based upon some weird experiences that I had. They are just like depending on your own thought process about spirituality. I It's very much a very spiritual kind of thing, and some of the journeys I had. And it results from I was in the Mississippi Delta working at one point, and it was a big deal. So like I'm in the Mississippi Delta working at the time I was working for Save the Children. I'm Black, or some people look at me and say, okay, she's Black, she's a person of color. That was a big deal in the Mississippi Delta. I was a high level individual who showed up. And when I tell you it's a big deal, you may not understand it today, but it was a big deal that someone from headquarters who was Black was the one who was in the Mississippi Delta. And so I go and I'm making a site visit. And while we're there, this much older Black woman came and just stood beside me and watched me. And she just watched me as I listened to people make their presentations. And then she took my hand and put sack of a little sack that had 5 gold coins in my hand. And I was like appalled because I knew I made more than that woman did. I knew I probably made more than she did. And I made more in a week than she probably made in 6 months, maybe a year. I was like, I can't take her money. I can't take her money. And my project manager came to me and I was like, I get this money's got to go back to her. I can't take these 5 gold coins. And they were $1 when they had the dollar bills, they made the dollar coins. And she told me, whatever you do, you cannot give that money back. You cannot give it back because that would be a disrespect to her. What it said to me was this woman was watching me to see if I deserved her gift. And in the book, I share a little bit because I believe I was also an answer to one of her prayers. She lived long enough to see this Black woman come to her territory where poverty was awful. And she deemed me okay. She deemed that I was worthy. And so that's what the book is about. It's about what those 5 gold coins represent in the spiritual journey of how I understood it.
Well, thank you for sharing. Fourth time to cry almost. And certainly the word weird does not probably does not sync up to, but that's a remarkable story. Thank you for sharing that, and its significance too. Anyway. So I think, unless we have any last questions, my last question for you, La-Verna, would be, if is there anything else that you wanted to share with us, or any thoughts or memories that just came up that you didn't get a chance to add? And
Well, I
if
will,
not, that's okay too.
yeah, no, what I will say to anybody, if you're considering the NECR program, do it. It's for anybody, anytime. I don't care if what your age is. Really, it's a program that is for everyone and you will benefit from it, period. And I mean, I actually think it should be a requirement for anyone, quite frankly, because it is that good. It
Well,
is
Morton
that
Deutsch
good.
agreed with you.
Yeah, it really is that good. And I hope many people will take advantage of it. I will also say, if you can see what's on my wall, that's what I believe mostly, that you matter, period. You matter. Your character matters, and the answer is in the room.
Well, thank you so much for your time and generosity of spirit today, and always, La-Verna. And thank you to everyone who joined us. Again, I feel that we'll all want to come back for more. So a recording of this will be available on the NECR website and YouTube channel by next week. Thank you all again, and I hope this is a good way to start your week. Be well and take care. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.